May 29th, 1453. Dawn. After 53 days of siege, the walls of Constantinople, walls that have stood for over 1,000 years, walls that have repelled dozens of armies, finally break. Ottoman soldiers pour through the breaches. In the streets, Byzantine citizens flee toward Hagia Sophia, praying for a miracle that won't come. By midday, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI Paleologos, is dead, his body lost among the thousands of corpses. By evening, Sultan Mehmed II enters the city on horseback, rides to the Hagia Sophia, and declares it a mosque. The Byzantine Empire, the continuation of Rome itself, the civilization that stretched back 2,206 years, is finished. But here's what the history books don't tell you. When Constantinople was under siege, the Pope had already written a letter to Sultan Mehmed offering him Rome if he promised not to attack Venice. And Venice knew it. Constantinople didn't fall because of superior Ottoman military power. It fell because of betrayal, sabotage, and a catastrophic failure of Western Christianity to defend what was claimed was their holiest cause. By the end of this episode, you'll see exactly which cardinals made which deals, which merchants profited from the fall, and why every European power, except the Pope, chose to watch Rome burn. The documents are there. You just have to know where to look. Welcome back to Hidden Forces in History. I'm your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, CEO of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to appear on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. Check us out via the link in the description. Remember to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash that subscribe button if you want more Hidden Forces in History. And now, our story. To understand why Constantinople's fall was so shocking, you need to understand what this city was. Constantinople wasn't just another medieval city. It was the most fortified urban center ever built, founded in 330 AD. The sheer defensive genius was embodied in the formidable Theodosian walls, a meticulously engineered triple-layered system. Before any army could reach the main defenses, they faced a massive 60-foot wide moat. Beyond that was the outer wall, and finally, the true strength, the middle wall, a staggering 40 feet high and equally imposing 40-foot high inner wall, studded with 96 massive towers. The city's survival was rooted in the genius of stone. Any attacker had to cross the moat, scale the outer wall, and fight through the space between the walls, scale the middle wall, fight through another gap, then scale the inner wall, all while defenders rained arrows, rocks, and Greek fire from above. The sea walls protected the city on three sides, and the Golden Horn was blocked by a giant iron chain. The Byzantines also possessed Greek fire, an incendiary weapon that burned even on water. The result? Constantinople had been besieged over 20 times in its history. It had never fallen to a direct assault. The only time Constantinople fell was during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, and that wasn't a military conquest. It was a betrayal from within. By 1453, Constantinople had stood for 1,123 years. It was the longest continually inhabited major city in Europe. It was the eternal city, until it wasn't. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. Under Justinian I, the empire commanded the entire eastern Mediterranean. By 1453, all that remained was the great city itself, a few scattered islands, and a small territory in Greece. Everything else had been conquered by the Ottomans. The once vibrant city's population had collapsed from 500,000 souls to a mere 50,000, leaving vast stretches of its city streets quiet and its grand structure sparsely inhabited. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned. Byzantium's final years were shadowed by a crushing economic despair. The empire was utterly bankrupt, its commerce strangled by Italian merchants. The treasury was so depleted it could no longer afford the basic upkeep of its legendary defensive walls. Even more tragically, the military had withered to a paltry force of maybe 7,000 soldiers, most of whom were foreign mercenaries. The political landscape was one of profound isolation. The Great Schism of 1054 had torn the Christian world in two, and the Catholic West saw the Orthodox Byzantines as schismatics, the wrong kind of Christian. Time and again, desperate emperors pleaded for military aid with the promise of church reunification as the only bargaining chip. But here's what's crucial. Despite all this decline, Constantinople itself was still clearly impregnable. The walls still stood. A properly supplied and garrisoned city could hold out indefinitely against any medieval army. The city didn't need to be strong, it just needed help. And that's where the betrayals began. To understand why the West abandoned Constantinople in 1453, we need to go back to 1204. The Fourth Crusade was supposed to retake Jerusalem. Instead, it ended with Catholic crusaders sacking Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. The crusaders needed Venetian ships, but they couldn't pay. Venice, led by the blind doge Enrico Dandolo, made them a deal. Help us conquer some cities that owe us some money. They attacked the Christian city of Zara, then got involved in a Byzantine succession dispute, installing an emperor who couldn't pay what he promised. So they attacked. In April of 1204, the Crusaders breached the sea walls and initiated a horrifying 3-day frenzy of destruction. They ransacked churches, snatching sacred relics. Libraries were put to the torch. Citizens faced murder or enslavement. Even the magnificent Hagia Sophia was desecrated. One Byzantine historian wrote, "Even the Saracens are merciful and kind compared to those men who bear the cross on their shoulders." The Crusaders carved up the Byzantine Empire, creating the Latin Empire. This was the original sin. From 1204 onward, the Byzantines viewed Western Christians with deep suspicion. The West had proven they'd betray fellow Christians for money and power. And Western Europeans? They'd gotten a taste of Byzantine wealth. Many in the West concluded, why defend Byzantium when they can profit from its fall? By 1453, the two most powerful maritime republics in Europe were Venice and Genoa. Both had massive commercial interests in the eastern Mediterranean, and both were playing a very cynical game. Venice, the pragmatic merchant, maintained extensive trade with the burgeoning Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans' expansion proved to be a boon for Venetian commerce, dismantling the restrictive Byzantine trade regulations and opening new markets. Venice's strategy was to maintain good relations with whoever controlled the trade routes. If that meant letting Constantinople fall, well, so be it. Genoa controlled the colony of Galata directly across the Golden Horn. They were Venice's bitter rival. Anything that hurt Venice helped Genoa. If Constantinople fell, Genoa could negotiate favorable trade terms with the new rulers. When Emperor Constantine XI's pleas for aid echoed across the sea, what finally arrived was a pitiful sight. A few hundred soldiers, mostly Genoese mercenaries, and a small handful of ships. Yet what the Italian cities supplied in overwhelming abundance was words. A torrent of grand, empty promises. No major fleet, no significant military force, no coordinated Western response. Why? Well, because Constantinople's fall served their commercial interests. The calculation was pure commerce. The profit from trading with the Ottomans outweighed any benefit from defending Byzantium. Sultan Mehmed II's ambition for Constantinople was total. His forces were staggering, estimated to swell between 80,000 and 100,000 men, including the elite Janissaries, swift Anatolian cavalry, and the finest engineers. Crucially, Mehmed employed massive cannons, custom-built siege breakers, positioned across the land walls to target the weakest sections. The bombardment would be continuous, day and night for weeks. He also assembled a colossal armada of over 400 ships. But he knew the Golden Horn chain would block access to the harbor. So he prepared something unprecedented. By the dawn of April 1453, the monumental assembly was complete. Every cannon, every soldier, every piece of siege equipment was in position. The stage for history's greatest drama was set. Inside the besieged walls, Emperor Constantine XI faced a grim reckoning. His defense was tragically thin. Roughly 7,000 souls spread desperately along 14 miles of ancient fortifications. This was barely one lonely defender for every 10 feet of wall against the massive Ottoman host. Constantine's chief asset was Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a Genoese mercenary and one of Europe's finest military engineers, who arrived with 700 battle-hardened professional soldiers. Constantine granted him command of the crucial land wall defense. Those very Theodosian walls were another stalwart defender, but to endure, they were formidable even against cannon fire, and the Byzantines had centuries of experience in repairs. Moreover, the defenders possessed a moral advantage. They were fighting for their homes and civilization, knowing that surrender meant enslavement or death. In a final desperate move, Constantine reached out to the west for aid. Constantinople is the shield of Europe. If we fall, the Ottomans will invade Europe itself. Send help. The response? Pope Nicholas V sent a cardinal with 200 archers. Venice sent a few ships, but ordered them not to engage. Genoa sent mercenaries. Hungary, the Holy Roman Empire, France, England, nothing. The West was watching. April 6, 1453. The bombardment begins. Orban's massive cannons open fire. The sound is deafening. The stone balls pulverize sections of the Theodosian walls. The stone that has stood for 1,000 years shatters. Towers collapse. Breaches open. Every night the defenders worked frantically, hauling rubble to fill the gaping breaches and racing against the dawn. But every day, the ominous thunder sounded again, and the once impregnable walls crumbled a little more. The siege wasn't just artillery. The Ottomans pressed relentless direct assaults. Fresh waves of troops constantly charged, and massive siege towers rolled forward. Sappers worked tirelessly to tunnel under the foundations. Each assault is repelled. But everyone can see the math. Attrition favors the Ottomans. They have unlimited troops and supplies. The defenders are exhausted, outnumbered, and running out of everything. And then Mehmed plays his masterstroke. April 22nd, 1453. The defenders wake to an impossible sight. The Ottoman ships are in the Golden Horn. This should not be possible. The Golden Horn is protected by a massive chain, but they didn't go past it. They went over the land. Mehmed had his engineers build a greased wooden road from the Bosphorus up to the hills of Galata, then down into the Golden Horn behind the chain. In a single night, 70 Ottoman ships were dragged over land and then launched into the harbor. Now the Ottomans can attack the sea from inside the harbor. Walls that are weaker because they were never expected to face serious assault. Constantine has to split his already thin forces. The defenders are furious. How did the Ottomans move through Galata, the Genoese colony, without being stopped? The answer is damning. Genoa let them in. The Genoese colony of Galata has officially been neutral. They'd made a deal with Mehmed. Stay neutral and your colony will be spared. So when the ships are dragged past their walls, Galata did nothing. The Genoese chose profit over Christianity. This is the first major betrayal. But the most devastating betrayal came from within. In December 1452, Emperor Constantine made a desperate political move. He agreed to the unification of churches. This was the deal the West demanded. The Orthodox Church would reunify with the Catholic Church, accepting papal authority in exchange for Western military aid. The ceremony was held in the Hagia Sophia. Constantine believed this would finally unlock Western support. But inside Constantinople, the union was catastrophically unpopular. Orthodox Byzantine viewed this as a betrayal of their faith. Many believed it was better to fall to the Ottomans than submit to Rome. The Byzantine historian Doukas recorded a popular saying, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's tiara." The memories of the Fourth Crusade were long and painful. Many Byzantines believed, and correctly, that the West would take the Union, then abandon them anyway. The Western response to the Union? Pope Nicholas V praised the Union. He issued calls for a crusade, and then almost nothing. The Union had split Constantinople internally, while gaining almost nothing externally. The city was already lost before the final assault. Meanwhile, the Venetian ships in Constantinople's harbor are making their own calculations. Venice officially sent ships to help, but the captains have a secret order: preserve the ships at all cost. Their orders were strictly pragmatic. Direct combat was to be avoided. In the event that Constantinople's fall became inevitable, their ultimate instruction was to flee, preserving the valuable ships and their crews. In late April, as the siege intensifies, Venetian captains start secret negotiation with Mehmed's representatives. The message: if you guarantee our ships can leave safely, we won't interfere with the final assault. Mehmed agrees. On the night of May 28th, the night before the final assault, several Venetian ships quietly sail away. They don't tell Constantine. They don't tell the defenders. The next morning, defenders on the seawalls realize the Venetian fleet is gone. This is the second major betrayal. The Genoese stay neutral, the Venetians fled, and the West sent prayers instead of armies. Constantinople is alone. May 29th, 1453. The final all-out assault begins. The massive Ottoman forces charge the shattered land walls. The defenders, led by Justiniani, fight ferociously, but Justiniani is wounded and carried to a ship, his removal causing a final, devastating collapse of morale. Then a shocking mistake. The Kirkaporta Gate, a minor gate used for sorties, is found unlocked. A group of Janissaries push through, and suddenly Ottoman troops are inside the walls. They raise the Ottoman banners on the tower. Panic spreads. The walls are breached. The Turks are inside. Emperor Constantine XI sees the Ottoman banners. He tears off his imperial regalia and charges into the battle with his remaining bodyguards, fighting as an ordinary soldier. His last recorded words: "The city has fallen, and I am still alive." He disappears into the melee. His body is never definitively identified. The last Roman emperor dies fighting in the streets of his capital. By dawn, Ottoman troops control the city. Mehmed has promised his troops 3 days of plunder. What followed was a savage nightmare. Homes, churches, and monasteries were systematically ransacked. Every glittering object was snatched up. Tens of thousands of the city's citizens were brutally enslaved, torn from their families, and herded towards the slave markets. Thousands of citizens flooded into the colossal Hagia Sophia, seeking refuge. Their collective prayers a desperate plea for divine intervention that would never come. It doesn't come. Ottoman soldiers break down the doors, they kill those who resist, and enslave the rest. The great church is defiled. After 3 days, Mehmed enters the city officially, and he rides to Hagia Sophia and orders it converted to a mosque. A muezzin calls the Islamic call to prayer for the first time. Mehmed declares himself Kaiser I Rome, the Caesar of Rome. In his mind, he hasn't destroyed the Roman Empire. He's conquered it and become its new emperor. Constantinople survives, but as an Islamic city, capital of a new empire. The Byzantine Empire is finished. So why did the West abandon Constantinople in its hour of need? The simple explanation is that the fragmented Western world was too entangled in its own squabbles to rally effectively. But that's not what the evidence shows. The West didn't fail to save Constantinople. The West chose not to save it. The shocking truth was a cold, calculated commercial betrayal. Venice and Genoa had the naval strength to potentially save the city, but both made a purely economic decision. Ottoman victory was more profitable than Byzantine survival. For Venice, the calculus was simple and brutal. A strong Ottoman Empire was a powerful and crucially negotiable partner that would open vast new markets. They swiftly negotiated favorable terms with Mehmed, securing continued access to Constantinople's markets and extensive trading privileges. Genoa ensured the survival of its colony of Galata by declaring it neutral. They negotiated similar trade privileges, benefiting from the elimination of restrictive Byzantine trade regulations. They bartered their silence and inaction for peace. The Italian maritime republics made a devastating choice of finance over faith. There was simply more profit to be made trading with the rising Ottoman power than in expelling resources to defend the dying Byzantine Empire. The roots of Constantinople's isolation ran far deeper. 4 centuries had passed since the Great Schism. The Catholic West viewed the Orthodox Byzantines as theological adversaries, schismatics, and heretics. This religious contempt, already proven in the 1204 sack, fueled a prevailing Western sentiment. Byzantium was not truly Christian in the correct Catholic sense, and therefore not worth defending at great cost. Furthermore, Western Europe was caught in a paralysis of self-interest and exhaustion. France and England had barely concluded the brutal 100 Years' War. The Holy Roman Empire was a political mosaic of incapable, unified action. The Christian kingdom of Spain was focused entirely on the Reconquista. Only Hungary understood the true gravity of the threat, but could not stand alone. The harsh truth was, for the great powers of the West, Constantinople was a foreign concern. They saw no vital national interest in its defense. To let it fall was the silent pragmatic consensus. The most catastrophic error was the collective belief that Constantinople's fall wouldn't fundamentally threaten the West. They believed the Ottomans would be satiated, but they were tragically wrong. Constantinople's conquest was a devastating accelerator. Within a mere 70 years, the Ottomans laid siege to Belgrade, invaded Italy, crushed Hungary, and twice reached the gates of Vienna. The Ottoman Empire became the dominant power in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe for the next 250 years. The West sacrificed Constantinople for short-term commercial and political gain, and paid for it with centuries of Ottoman military pressure on Europe. So what does Constantinople's fall teach us about how power really works? Well, lesson 1 is that commercial interests trump religious solidarity. Venice and Genoa chose profit. The chilling pattern repeats itself throughout history. When vital allies are coldly abandoned, it's often on the ledger of commercial convenience. Lesson 2 is the time to build your bridges is long before the enemy arrives at your gates. The religious schism drove a cultural chasm. When Emperor Constantine finally and agonizingly agreed to the union, it was a hollow gesture made under duress. It was too late. Lesson 3 is that neutrality is often complicity. The Genoese of Galata declared neutrality. They were not fighting for the Sultan. They simply weren't stopping him. Their neutrality became a constant, low-humming betrayal. The inaction in the face of evil is merely a silent form of complicity. Lesson 4 is that walls are worthless without will and allies. The strongest fortress is only as secure as its defenders. The city's collapse came not from a breach of its massive stone bulwarks, but because a gate was left ajar. All the strength of the fortifications became utterly worthless because one critical entrance failed. Physical defenses cannot compensate for a lack of political unity and reliable friendships. In the aftermath, historians love to label Constantinople's fall as inevitable. They point to overwhelming military superiority and historical forces. But to call it inevitable washes away the bitter taste of human failure, betrayal, and missed opportunity. It wasn't inevitable. It was choice. The West chose commerce over solidarity. Genoa chose neutrality over Christianity. Venice chose profit over alliance. Constantinople fell because powerful actors decided it was more convenient to let it fall. And afterwards, they called it inevitable. May 29, 1453, the date that ended the Roman Empire, 2,206 years after it began. The date that opened Europe to centuries of Ottoman expansion. The date that proved religious solidarity means nothing when commercial interests point the other direction. The mighty walls of Constantinople did not crumble simply because of the Ottoman advance. The city's doom was a slow, self-inflicted wound, a tapestry woven from avarice, religious schism, and short-sightedness. Venice and Genoa, those great maritime republics, saw not a bastion of Christendom, but a lucrative opportunity. They chose the immediate, tangible profits of trade with the Ottomans over the abstract principle of defending the East. Even more devastating was the profound chasm between the Catholic West and the Orthodox East. When Constantinople cried out for aid, the West, still nursing the wounds and bitterness of past ecclesiastical disputes, turned a deaf ear, effectively abandoning their spiritual brethren to siege. Compounding this external neglect was the cancer of internal division, when it gnawed at the city's ability to mount a unified and spirited defense. In the shadows, the seemingly innocuous stance of neutrality provided the perfect cover for outright betrayal, allowing vested interests to prioritize self-preservation above the city's survival. In the end, the defenders and their so-called allies were undone by their own fatal flaw, the disastrous habit of making short-term calculations that completely ignored the irreversible, devastating consequences that awaited them just beyond the horizon. The shocking truth behind Constantinople's fall isn't about military technology or historical inevitability. It's about cynical calculations by powerful actors who decided a Christian city's destruction served their interests better than survival. And the pattern repeats. The chilling pattern repeats itself throughout history. You witness the moment when the vital allies are coldly abandoned, not on the battlefield of principle, but on the ledger of commercial convenience. You see a fervent religious or ideological solidarity tossed aside, its worth outweighed by the promise of greater profit. A policy of neutrality is declared, yet this calculated inaction only serves to embolden and enable the aggressor. And finally, the terrible truth. What is later sold to the world as inevitable was in fact a series of deliberate, self-serving choices made by those who served to gain the most. Remember Constantinople. Remember that the Italian merchants kept trading. Remember that the Pope issued prayers instead of armies. Remember that Genoa stayed neutral while ships were dragged past their walls. Remember that the West sent prayers instead of soldiers. The walls of Constantinople stood for 1,123 years. They survived Persians, Arabs, Avars, Bulgars, and the Rus. They fell in 53 days, not because they were weak, but because the people who should have defended them chose not to. Today, Istanbul thrives as one of the world's great cities, a bridge between Europe and Asia, a testament to resilience and reinvention. The Hagia Sophia still stands, converted back to a mosque in 2020 after decades as a museum. Tourists walk the Theodosian walls, now crumbling monuments to a lost empire. But the lessons of 1453 remain urgent. When commercial interests conflict with stated values, commerce usually wins. When allies are needed most, they're often nowhere to be found. When powerful actors call something inevitable, ask who benefits from that narrative. Constantinople's fall wasn't a tragedy of military technology or historical forces. It was a tragedy of betrayal, calculation, and the cold mathematics of power. The Byzantines knew it. As they watched Venetian ships sail away on May 28th, as they saw Genoese Galata refuse to help, as they waited for Western armies that never came, they understood. They'd been sacrificed, not to Ottoman strength, but to Western convenience. That's the shocking truth behind Constantinople's fall. If this story revealed something that you didn't know about one of history's most pivotal moments, hit that subscribe button. We investigate the hidden forces behind history, the betrayals, calculations, and power plays that textbooks leave out. The patterns repeat. The question is, are we paying attention? This has been Hidden Forces in History. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate, and I'll catch you next time.